Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I hope that you and your loved ones are well. My name is Tammy Yates Rajadure, and I am the Executive Director of Realize, which hosts the Secretariat of the National Episodic Disabilities Forum. My pronouns are she and her. I am a Black woman with an afro swept up by a headband. I am wearing a rust-colored turtleneck, and the color rust is close to a reddish-orange-brown combo. Others might differ with that description, but that's what it looks like to me. And I also have on burgundy earrings with a bronze and copper leaf shaped chain around my turtleneck top. I am in the office at the moment with cream walls and a black bookshelf behind me. And with that vivid description, it is my profound pleasure to welcome each of you to the final day of the Virtual Disability Work Conference 2021. It's so hard to believe that the first 3 days of the conference have flown by already. The content has been so rich, the wise practices shared so empowering, and the conversations have also been some tough ones, with challenges that have been shared, since we all know that the barriers, both visible and invisible, that prevent the full inclusion of people with disabilities in the workplace here in Canada still exist, and some would argue have been amplified in our current COVID context. Having served as an MC at the virtual conference last year, it is doubly thrilling for me to not only serve as one of the MCs this year, but also sit before you today as one of the new members of this distinguished Disability Work Conference Steering Committee. It is truly an honor to be in the esteemed company of other new members like Krista Carr, Dorami Ealing, and Mahadio Sukai, who each served as opening MCs on one of the conference days. Needless to say, the stalwarts who inaugurated the conference and are the original members of the committee are each pioneers in their own right. And I'd like to thank them for all that they have done in bringing people from across the country together to not only discuss the issue of disability and work, but most importantly, to propel us into continued action. While watching the news last night, I saw on the ticker tape that runs across the screen with the day's breaking news that dictionary.com had selected the word allyship as the word for 2021. As a settler for the past 9.5 years on Turtle Island, which we now call Canada, and as a staunch ally to our Indigenous peoples across Turtle Island, I would like to center us for one moment by asking each of you to just breathe in and breathe out and do it again. Breathe in and breathe out. That feels good, doesn't it? Well, that air that you breathe in and breathe out is on traditional Indigenous lands, the land on which we all have the honor to live, work, love, and play, is all on traditionally Indigenous lands, and I am eternally grateful for the opportunity to be here in Toronto, which is the traditional land of the Wendat, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, Métis, and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. Acknowledging the cultural mosaic of Canada, I acknowledge the many other peoples who have contributed to this place and this space we all now call home. I want to acknowledge the many traditions and cultural backgrounds that are represented. You, your families, and your ancestors all have roles to play in making this place and this space an inclusive and welcoming one. And for that, I want to say thank you. So we're all here today contributing to the overall goal of the conference, which is to identify ways to help the Pan-Canadian Strategy for Disability and Work, a strategy that was developed in consultation with many of you as people with living experience of disability and other key stakeholders in the movement. So today is day 4, but what happened on day 3? The theme for day 3 was ensuring secure and comprehensive supports for people with disabilities. The keynote speaker, Yasmin LaRoche, who was the Deputy Minister of Public Service Accessibility in the federal government, highlighted the use of specific targets for the employment of persons with disabilities in the federal public service. The targets serve as a guide to their ambition and a way to track progress. Some of the key messages from the excellent parallel sessions were: one size does not fit all. That resonates, I'm sure, with all of us. Income supports must lift people out of poverty and avoid creating barriers to employment. We've all been advocating about that for too long. Injured workers with mental health issues report a lack of coordination or continuity of care, as if the system is telling people to hurry up and heal. That is no longer acceptable. In addition to inadequate income support, access to supports for daily living or for school or employment are often very inadequate for people with disabilities, given the fragmented nature of support programs. Navigating the various programs that offer some support can still be a huge challenge. And the intersection of disability with other life circumstances, such as being Indigenous, or a part of a racialized group, or being a recent immigrant, can add to the difficulties people face in daily life and in finding and sustaining employment or returning to work after an episode or period of absence for any reason whatsoever. And this leads us into today's session with the theme, moving forward together towards full inclusion in employment. I am extremely excited by today's content, not only because I'm the MC, but especially since we're covering issues related to intersectionality that are close to my heart. We will start with a keynote on Indigenous disability and employment, then move to parallel sessions that dive deeply into cross-disability, accessibility, and diverse intersectionality at work, as well as employability, integration, and retention in work, and also discuss critical issues related to youth and young adults with disabilities. We'll wrap up with a discussion about the Disability Work Conference governance, as well as a delegate engagement opportunity. There are also recorded vignettes about the living experience of persons with disabilities or the experience of employers of persons with disabilities under the vignettes tab in your conference website. Short pre-recorded presentations are available on demand under the pre-recorded tab. And we're encouraging everyone to take a look at these when you can. For common tech questions about navigating the conference website and participating in the conference sessions, you can visit the FAQ, or the Frequently Asked Questions page, where you'll also find a participant guide. We're pleased to provide CART and ASL interpretation for all of the live conference sessions and French-English interpretation for all keynotes and many of the parallel sessions. Captioning is available by clicking on the CC button or live transcription button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. You can also view the live captions by clicking on the stream text URL posted in the chat box if you wish to view the captions on a separate screen outside of the Zoom platform. All pre-recorded presentations include captions for accessibility. The video of an ASL interpreter will be on your screen, as your video layout in Zoom will already display the ASL interpreter in side-by-side mode. You can adjust the size of the screen with the ASL interpreter by placing your cursor on the bar in between the two screens and dragging the bar side to side. For all keynotes and many of the parallel sessions, French-English interpretation is available. There will be a note in the program that says "Des interprètes français-anglais seront disponibles," or French-English interpreters will be available. In Zoom, select the French language channel by clicking on the interpretation icon at the bottom of your screen and select French. You can then hear the meeting audio translated into French by a live interpreter. I'm now going to repeat this in French. Pour tous les discours d'ouverture et de nombreuses sessions parallèles, une interprétation français-anglais est disponible. Il y aura une note dans le programme. Des interprètes français-anglais seront disponibles, ou French-English interpreters will be available. Dans Zoom, sélectionnez le canal de langue française en cliquant sur l'icône l'interprétation au bas de votre écran, puis sélectionnez français. Vous pourrez alors entendre l'audio de la réunion traduit en français par un interprète en direct. If navigating the website is not accessible to you, you can send us an email to receive an alternative agenda in Word and links to join the conference sessions. We have asked all speakers to share with us only accessible materials if they want us to post them on the website. If you find any material posted on the website that is not accessible, please do let us know by sending an email to info, that's info, at dwcstrategy.ca. There is a chat box for technical support available at the bottom right corner of the website for anyone who may be having trouble accessing the virtual sessions. You must add the sessions you want to watch to your agenda. Make sure you're logged in first and foremost, and go to the conference sessions page and click on the title of each section you're interested in viewing. Add it to your agenda if it is not already there by clicking on the Register and Add to My Agenda button. You can then join or watch by clicking the green Join Presentation button. All sessions that you've added to your agenda will appear on the My Personal Agenda section, and you can add them from there. Note that this conference does not support Internet Explorer browser. Conference sessions will be recorded and available on the conference website for 3 months after the conference. That's really good news. As I mentioned a little while ago, we're hosting a delegate engagement session entitled Reflections from the Conference, moving forward together from 2:55 p.m. to 3:15 p.m. Eastern Time. For this session, we are seeking to have several delegates speak for approximately 1 minute about the DWC initiative on the following topics. The first, ideas for implementation of the strategy pillars, and a reminder that the 2 pillars are foster disability confident and inclusive workplaces and develop comprehensive supports for persons with disabilities. The second is thoughts on measurement and evaluation of progress in reaching our vision of inclusive employment. The third is promising ideas, practices, or initiatives that you've heard about at the conference or elsewhere that warrant profiling. To participate in this delegate engagement opportunity, join the reflections session at 2:15 Eastern. And during the open mic opportunity, you can raise your hand by clicking the raised hand button in the webinar controls or message in the chat box, and we will change your role on Zoom from attendee to a panelist, and you can then turn your video and unmute yourself. To get the ball rolling today, I am so pleased to hand the Zoom mic over to my fellow Disability and Work Conference Steering Committee member, Maureen Hahn. I'd like to wish each of you an enjoyable day 4. Over to you, Maureen.
Tammy, thank you so much. Thank you for your kind words, for your vision for today, and welcome to the steering committee. I am really looking forward to working with you over the next little while. So it's my pleasure today. As you know, my name is Maureen Hahn. I am the president and CEO of the Canadian Council on Rehabilitation and Work, CCRW, and I am also a member of the steering committee for the DWC in Canada initiative. And it's my great honor to introduce our keynote for today, Neil Belanger. I first met Neil in Geneva when we sat together as part of civil society witnessing Canada's appearance in front of the UN Convention on the Rights for People with Disabilities. And since that time, Neil has shown himself to be a true ally to employment for people with disabilities with an intersectional lens of indigeneity. His full bio is on the website, so I won't go into his full bio, but today Neil is going to speak with us about issues that face Indigenous, the Indigenous and disability communities, both on and off reserve. There will be a Q&A following Neil's presentation, so please put your questions in the Q&A box. And with that, it is my sincere honor to welcome you, Neil, over to you.
Thank you, Maureen, and thank you everyone for being here today. And I'd like to thank the conference steering committee for having me. It's always enjoyable for me to be here. As Maureen said, my name is Neil Belanger. I'm the Chief Executive Officer for Disability or Indigenous Disability Canada and the British Columbia Aboriginal Network on Disability Society. We're a national Indigenous disability organization based out of Victoria, and I'd like to acknowledge that I'm calling in today from my home office on the traditional territories of the Esquimalt and Songhees people. And I'd also like to take this time to acknowledge each of the territories of the participants here today all across Canada, and thank you for being here. So, I'm not a very good keynote speaker. I don't know why anybody would ask me to be one. So I've created a PowerPoint here today just to run through some of the work that we do at our organization, some of the work that we do with our partners in relation to Indigenous disability, some of the barriers that the people and communities that we work with face, and some of the strategies that we're looking at to move forward for, as the conference theme is, a more inclusive country, where inclusive employment, where everybody has the opportunity to thrive and work to their capacity and be successful. So with that, I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to give a brief PowerPoint presentation, and we'll run through this and see if there's any questions. So as I said, we're the Indigenous Disability Canada or British Columbia Aboriginal Network on Disability Society. And our organization this year is actually 30 years old, and we would have marked the event a little differently, but of course, because of COVID, everything has gone a little bit sideways for everybody here. But we're the only Indigenous standalone organization, Indigenous disability organization of our type in Canada. We have received international recognition for our work here, and we hold special consultative status with the United Nations. In all the work that we do here, we use our knowledge, experience, and relationships, and I would imagine that many of the participants on the call here today at the conference, we've probably worked with or have partnerships with. So we use those relationships to fulfill our vision of an inclusive and accessible Canada for all Indigenous persons and families living with disabilities, where their disabilities and health priorities are identified, planned for, and addressed, including employment. And of course, our mission is advancing the unique disability and health priorities of Indigenous persons through collaboration, consultation, and the delivery of comprehensive client services. So in Canada today, as many of you may be familiar, we have a population of about 1.67 million people who identify as being Indigenous. And these are statistics from 2016. There are approximately 634 First Nation communities in Canada, 53 Inuit communities, and numerous Métis settlements. And as you are aware, 22% of the general population of Canada live with a disability. But within the Indigenous community, it's significantly higher. And we use a rate of 30%, but in all reality, it's probably about, between 33 to 37%. The difficulty is in collecting information is that Stats Canada does not collect information within First Nations communities. But at the 30% disability rate, we know that there are over 500 Indigenous peoples living with disabilities in Canada. We also know that Indigenous unemployment is significantly higher than the non-Indigenous population, and more so for Indigenous peoples living with disabilities and for Indigenous women. So some of the common barriers that the individuals that we serve face, significantly anti-Indigenous racism and discrimination, and disability discrimination. So some of you may be aware of some of the reports that have gone out in the last couple of years here in British Columbia, and some of the meetings nationally across Canada held by the federal government to start looking more at anti-Indigenous racism within the healthcare system. Here we had the In Plain Sight report that came out that really highlighted the systemic anti-Indigenous racism. We know stories of Joyce Echuan. We know about Brian Sinclair. Indigenous peoples, some of whom live with disabilities, trying to access services, and really the systems have failed them. This is not just within the healthcare system. We know it transitions and permeates through all systems, including places of employment. So, there's significant work that has to be done here, both for anti-Indigenous racism and disability discrimination. Systemic poverty. 80% of the First Nations in Canada have a median income under the poverty line. Systemic poverty leads to health factors, which of course influence your ability to go out and look for a job, to maintain employment. Educational levels. Many of the individuals that we serve have lower educational levels than the non-Indigenous population. Again, putting barriers up for employers who want a minimum of grade 12 or a university or a trade certificate to be able to get employed. Access to safe and affordable housing, another thing. If you don't have a safe, affordable place to live, how can you work? How can you afford to take a job that doesn't pay for the bills? Accessible to buildings and infrastructure. As we're all aware, many places of employment across Canada are inaccessible or partially accessible or non-accessible. So limiting the availability of employment opportunities. Many places, if we look at the nonprofit sector, organizations such as ours or others may have limited funding. So they have to take, buildings or rent buildings that are in need of major work to be able to hire persons living with disabilities, particularly those with physical disabilities that require the built environment to be taken care of. Access to information and technology as well goes back to systemic poverty. It goes to connectivity within communities. If you don't have that, now we're looking during times of COVID, how can you work remotely? If your home isn't accessible, if there isn't accessible buildings in your communities, how do you work there? Employment requirements. I spoke a little bit about that, about the requirements to even get into the door, to get to an interview. How do you make that first step if you don't meet the employment minimal requirements that the employer is asking for without any accommodations? Locations of communities. We have many communities that are remote. There's limited opportunities for jobs there. And for jobs outside the community, there's often little public transportation or ability to get to and from work, particularly if you're living with a disability. And significantly, we've seen more and more the impact of cultural differences, the lack of information about different cultures, in our case, Indigenous peoples living with disabilities, and what that means in the workplace. And I'll talk a little bit about that more in some of the work that we're doing now. And of course, as it says in the bottom, this list is not exhaustive. But we also see that in spite of the significant rate of disability and unemployment experienced within the Indigenous community, the priority remains relatively low. relatively low in relation to Indigenous disability, relatively low in relation to Indigenous employment for persons living with disability. And there's a number of reasons for that. I mean, there could be jurisdictional issues. We have provincial, territorial, and federal jurisdictions. Employers often look at it and say, well, it's easier to hire somebody else. It's easier to place somebody else in this position, someone whose disability may not be severe as someone else, or just somebody without a disability, particularly when we have contracts that are based upon how many people the contract holder is placing into work. For us, we have numerous competing community priorities. So we've mentioned some of them. It's housing, access to water, access to healthcare, transportation issues, poverty issues, all those different issues that leadership within communities or organizations have to deal with, which means sometimes employment and sometimes Indigenous persons living with disabilities are not prioritized the way they should be. With employers, we see often employers are afraid to offend. They're uncertain how to engage Indigenous communities and organizations. Some employers, are desperate for workers, but they'll send out an email or a fax, and then expect that the community or the organization will respond immediately and be very willing to have send people for work without establishing some sort of relationship, without establishing some sort of connection. And employers also fear allegations of racial disability discrimination. And it's easier to avoid that than actually go out and take that chance. We've seen that often with employers that we work with when we're working with persons living with a disability, Indigenous persons living with a disability. They're worried about that. If the employee doesn't work out, what's going to happen? How am I going to get sued for being discriminatory because of their ancestral background or because of their disability? So all legitimate fears, but all easy to address. And so what we do to help address these things is to raise some of the priority. And here, I won't go through all of them, but we sit on a number of provincial, local, national advisory committees to governments to make sure that the information that we experience as an organization, but more importantly, that the people that we serve bring to us talking about the barriers that they face and their recommendations are heard by government at various levels. So we're quite well connected, and there's many people here on the call today that I have the pleasure of serving with on many of these committees. One of the other things that we do here is to raise awareness. And so I'm bringing this slide up here because it is about awareness and it is about partnership if we're going to move together and have a more inclusive country, particularly when it comes to employment. Last month was the 7th anniversary of Indigenous Disability Awareness Month here in Canada. And we created this month back in 2015 because we knew the priority of Indigenous disability just wasn't there across Canada, across all provinces, all territories, within the federal government, and even within our communities, largely due to some of those barriers that we spoke about before. So we created the month first to really highlight and to raise the awareness and celebrate Indigenous persons living with disabilities, because and the contributions that they bring to all of our communities, as employers, as employees, as elders, as knowledge keepers, and then secondly, to raise awareness of the barriers, including barriers to employment. We were very successful in that. In 2017, the UN International Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities recommended to Canada to clear the month every year. That hasn't happened yet, but we're working on it. But it's, like I said, it's been very successful. And since its creation in 2015, we've seen British Columbia, Saskatchewan, this year Manitoba come on board. The Assembly of First Nations has declared it, Métis Nation BC, First Nation Summit, Yukon's Council of First Nations, and hundreds of other organizations across Canada, both Indigenous and non. This year as well, we saw 6 capital cities in Canada actually recognize and proclaim the month, including Ottawa. So it's quite heartening to see. And again, this year as well, we've reached international status with the Kapo Maori Antara, which is New Zealand's oldest consumer-led national Indigenous disability organization, officially proclaiming the month. So now we're international, and we're going to keep moving. We've had interest in Australia as well. And again, it's about raising that awareness and breaking down the barriers on all aspects of Indigenous disability, and including employment. So it's really a partnership thing. It's a collaborative thing. It's a great step for moving forward within our sector. So these are just some of the events during the year. So we had some quite notable people this year, talking about it. We've had senators, we had ministers, we had the prime minister speaking out loud this year, Dr. Suzuki, Graham Greene, Indigenous actor from Dances with Wolves, the president of Congress Aboriginal People. So it's been really quite good. Other things we do to assist looking at employment in other areas as well is our Indigenous Disability Case Management Program. So in this program, we take a holistic look at the individual coming in, and we make sure that all their needs, as much as we can, are addressed. And this could include housing, could be transportation, it could be access to different health and disability services, and employment. And we'll work with the individual on a one-to-one basis, getting to know them, to understand them, and let them tell their story, because that's a big part of it, is to understand who they are and what their needs are. Often organizations will get people in and out as fast as they can. We take our time because people have a story to tell, and often in the past they have never been listened to. So we allow that opportunity to tell their stories. We want them to know us, and we want us to know them. And so we look at that, particularly with employment, and say, what is your living situation? What issues are you facing in relation to poverty, if any? What kind of health and disability needs do you need? And we'll try to address those before we will move them into a place where we say, you're ready to go for employment. And we work with other organizations as well. So we might work with organizations that provide life skills training. We might work with organizations that provide resume services, even employers such as CCRW that place people into positions once they're ready to do. But the important thing about this is the holistic approach to it. We just don't put people out and say, there's a job, go apply for it. We want to make sure that they have the supports necessary to be successful in that position and successful in their career path forward. And we keep their file open. We don't close the file if somebody gets a job and suddenly they're no longer in receipt of assistance of any sort. We keep the file open because there's things that will come up, and we're here to support. Another program which is pertinent is the monitoring the Convention of the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. So as Maureen said, that's where we first met. But we work with over 29 national disability organizations across Canada as the lead secretariat organization in monitoring Canada's compliance to the UN's Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And that includes Article 27, employment, work and employment. So Maureen's organization, CCRW, has been the lead on this, and with getting information from other stakeholders such as us and other organizations working in the employment field. And it's really good work, and something that we often lack within civil society is understanding how work at the international level can really make changes here at the domestic level. So we've given you a couple of examples, with our awareness month, but also with the Pan-Canadian plan moving forward here, and other areas as well, that we see that international work really has the ability to change domestic policy for the better in relation to employment and all other aspects for persons living with disabilities. We also have developed support for Indigenous student learning program, and this is a time-limited program now. It'll end in 2023. We started it last year. We gave approximately $1 million worth of new laptops to Indigenous students across Canada of limited financial means, prioritizing those students living with a disability. So it was a very successful program. We're moving forward on it now. Over the next year and a half or so, we're going to give away about $2.5 million worth of technology, again, to Indigenous students. And that's so that they can be successful in their studies and their future career path, whatever that might be, or future studies. So it was really quite a good program. And we don't only look at laptops. We're trying to expand it as much as we can, because not everybody needs a laptop. But most people do ask for that, and it's a great resource if you're living in poverty. If you're a family of 4 or 5 and there's only one computer in the house, and you have 5 children or whatever who are trying to access that. University students, the different environments that we're now learning in, remote, on site, and at home. So it's really a great program, and we're looking forward to really pushing that out. One of the programs here as well we're working on is the Indigenous Employment and Disability Project. So we're working with employers across Canada to take a look at why there is a reluctance to hire Indigenous persons living with disabilities in the workplace. And as we noted earlier, there's a significant unemployment rate for Indigenous peoples and Indigenous peoples living with disabilities. And we talked about a lot of things, but we're really looking at what the employers say. And we've put out anonymous surveys, so we're hoping to get unfettered comments, and really looking at the Indigenous aspect of it. Is there discriminatory attitudes towards Indigenous people living with a disability in your workplace? What would you recommend that could change those things? So it's been quite revealing, and some of the things that we know about is and that recommendations we'll make to government is Indigenous and disability cultural training, humility training for the frontline staff. And because what we found is that in many places of employment, persons living with disabilities, Indigenous people, may not portray as having a disability or being Indigenous. So often when that happens, people will feel free to talk openly about things that they may feel passionate about, including funding for Indigenous communities and organizations, or persons with disabilities receiving funding support from governments, and that creates a hostile workplace. And I think that when we talk to people, when we talk to employers, training was one of the number one things that they said, and we took a different spin on it, saying frontline training, frontline staff, because often we see training provided to organizational leadership and expecting it will transition down. We think a resource should be done, created by Indigenous persons living with disabilities and non-Indigenous persons living with disabilities, to really create this culture of humility training for frontline staff that would be available for all employers across Canada online for free, so they can walk through it and how to conduct yourself within the workplace, particularly with Indigenous persons and persons living with disabilities, and all people of all cultures. Another barrier that we found is the reluctance to hire Indigenous persons living with disabilities because of the perceived length of time it might be taken away from work. One, for the disability, because there's that angst out there that if you hire somebody with a disability, they're going to be away on sick all the time, or the case may be. But also the Indigenous aspect of it, where there's requirement for cultural leave and family obligations. And that's a legitimate concern, because there's strong connections within the Indigenous community to culture, to traditional practices, and people need time off for that. And so one of the things that we're going to be recommending to the government is take a look at that and create this traditional leave. In BC, we just had the government mandate 5 days sick time for everybody, which is great. We thought it'd be higher, but traditional leave as well, cultural leave, which then can be used for Indigenous culture, non-Indigenous culture, but give people the opportunity to be able to stay connected to their communities, to their culture, regardless of what culture that might be. And that's what inclusivity is, and that's what we have to do more. And again, we found, surprisingly, and maybe not so surprising, that there's really still a lack of information on employer resources out there that would help them and assist them when hiring individuals, Indigenous and non-Indigenous individuals living with disabilities. So another idea, is to have, all these resources provincially, territorially, federally listed online, so people can find them easily rather than going through multiple websites, this type of thing, but also understanding that not every employer may have access to the internet as well, and this type of thing. So work needs to be done on that as well. And then I'll just close up briefly with some of the opportunities coming forward. So there's a lot of needs out there for sure, but I think that anybody that works within employment and within the disability community, although we've many of the conversations that we have today, we had 20 years ago, we always look forward to a better day and things moving forward. So for us, the Accessible Canada Act for First Nations across Canada, many of you know that legislation came into effect in 2019. First Nations communities across Canada, however, are exempt from it for now. We and other organizations are working with communities now to see how the legislation can be changed to better reflect the Indigenous disability lens, and we're continuing with that. And we're also working with Accessible Standards Canada, looking at two areas, and that's the built environment and policies affecting First Nations. So we're working in those over the next 3 years to make recommendations for development of standards and regulations. And there's certainly different policies out there. For example, the CRA policy, if we think about employment, where there are some First Nations who have exempted themselves from paying CPPD for their status employees. So, and of course, this results in not only not having a pension plan, but if you get hurt at work, you wouldn't have the supports there either. So it's a it's different policies like that. We're not sure why they exist, but we'll be examining them and make recommendations as well. The built environment, of course, with accessibility issues, if it's not an accessible community, it restricts your ability to work there. We have the Disability Inclusion Action Plan coming up now. Tammy mentioned that. And so we're excited about that. We're disappointed it didn't make it into the throne speech, but we're heartened that the Prime Minister noted it on December 3rd. And we're looking for a new federal disability supplement, at rates that are going to pull people out of the poverty. We're saying it has to be $1,700 topped on to all rates across Canada, federal, provincial, territorial. Generous income exemption, so as Tammy also mentioned, so that it ensures that people have the opportunity to work and to work to their full potential and be able to thrive. And working at employment strategy, ensuring comprehensive development of Indigenous people. And that's the thing, we have to have a call to action for Indigenous people and be able to move forward and make sure that employment is a high priority and that Indigenous people are involved in all planning aspects of that Indigenous people living with disabilities. And lastly, I'll just say the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, UNDRIP, and the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. Both really great opportunities. We know that the federal government has legislated UNDRIP into law, as well as the British Columbia government. Well, I'm not sure what that means. And I don't think that governments really understand what that relation means that either for employment or other services, and even our communities. I think there's expectations, and the expectations may be different. So it'll be interesting to see how that unfolds. We have worked with governments to try to get the CRPD entrenched in Canadian law. We have the support of some senators. We're going to continue to move forward on that to hopefully see a day when the CRPD is part of law in Canada, and that way we'll have more support and more safeguards and expectations from the government to be able to address employment needs and other needs as well. And we're looking for more transparency from the various human rights committees. So the Senior Officials Committee responsible for human rights and the Continuing Committee of Officials on Human Rights. So two different committees, both working on international conventions with Canada. We've met with both of them and said, look, we see the recommendations coming from the UN, in relation to employment and other areas as well. And Canada doesn't reply to them, or they don't act upon them. Tell us why. And if we understand better why Canada can't do these things, maybe we can provide you with better mechanisms to start addressing these things so you can address it. So we're looking for more open relationships there and better understandings about, why Canada won't do things, so that we can help them to show them how they can do things in relation to employment and housing and all those areas that impact a person's ability to obtain and maintain employment. And finally, my second to last slide is prior to the call, my friend Maureen Hahn, who introduced me, noted that she was not in my collage of pictures for Indigenous Disability Awareness Month. So I thought I would throw this out to her just to make up for that horrible oversight. And that's it. That's my presentation. I thank you for your time. And for those of you who are still awake, I'd be happy to take any questions should you have any. Thank you.
So thank you so much, Neil. Unfortunately, we don't have time for questions right now. If you do have general questions for Neil, I'm sure that he will be happy to answer you. I've put the website in the chat box, but it's also BCANDS, which is BCANDS at BCANDS, BCANDS.bc.ca. And with that, Neil, except for the last slide, I think that you are an excellent keynote speaker. I'm not too sure why you started off your keynote by saying that you don't know why anybody would have you do a keynote. You brought a lot of excellent thought to us and a lot of considerations. I've made quite a few notes around, especially around employment not being a priority, and how can we as a group together that brings disability and work in Canada together under consideration. We have to be pausing, and we have to be thinking about these questions that you've given to us. So I thank you very much.
Thank you.
My friend. I appreciate your time. I appreciate your creativity, and we'll see you. We'll see you again very soon. So thank you.
Thanks, Ray. Thanks, everyone.
To the rest of the delegates, we are going to be having a vignette now. After the end of the vignette, this session will close down, and you're encouraged to go off into your sessions. Thanks very much, everybody.
Hi, my name is Sabrina, and I first wanted to say thank you for having me this year at your conference. I'm really grateful for the opportunity to participate. I work in customer service and administration in the financial industry, and I live with a mental health disability. My employment journey is still ongoing, as unfortunately I lost my job during the pandemic due to accommodation requests not being able to be met. My role, or most of the time my role in customer service and administration, is either internal or external client and non-facing customer service. So that is answering phones, setting up meetings, preparing catering, doing stock supplies, as well as general upkeep and maintenance for the office itself. Yes, so I've been working in customer service and administration since about 2012. So I've had many years of experience. And even before that, I had customer service experience in retail since I was about a teenager. So yeah. For me, as I said, I live with a mental health disability, and I have found that I have faced barriers trying to be successful in the workplace, especially around requesting accommodations. So I feel the best scenario for me is having the ability to be able to work from home. I find that I thrive the best, I'm the most productive, and be able to focus, especially when my mental health symptoms are exacerbated. I find that when that's the case, and when I'm in an office environment, it actually makes my symptoms worse, and then I'm not as productive or focused. So that's why I find working from home is the best way for me. The last place that I actually worked when I did request this accommodation, we were actually in lockdown, and I was already working from home at the time. I was doing the whole role from home because everything was, we're in virtual world now, so the option, especially now, it's available. Previously, in previous years, when I asked for that accommodation request, that wasn't as accessible as it is now. But so this time I felt that it wasn't that big of an ask just because I was already doing it as well. Unfortunately, as soon as we were out of lockdown, I was told I needed to go back into the office. I felt that I didn't understand why couldn't just be able to continue to work from home. I even was perfectly comfortable and okay to have a hybrid model because I feel with my symptoms I don't need to always have to work from home. I can work in the office and still be productive and thrive as long as my symptoms are managed. So I was perfectly comfortable doing that. And at first, I was actually told we can try to work on this. And then, unfortunately, they changed their mind or so forth, and it wasn't a request they wanted to fulfill anymore. And as I was in the probationary period of the first 3 months, by the end of the first 3 months contract, they felt it wasn't a good fit and they didn't want to continue on. So I actually felt like I was okay to ask for it. So when I've asked for accommodation previously, and this was pre-pandemic, I feel like it was me. It was like I was asking for something I shouldn't be asking for, and it felt like it was an over ask. This time, though, because it was already being done and we're in this world now that everyone is working from home, I didn't feel like it was an over ask. It was still very nerve-wracking, and my anxiety was not great. My mental health was not great during the whole process, especially because this was one of the first times that I was really advocating and making sure that I was wanting it, that I needed it in place. So, yes, I felt overwhelmed and it was nerve-wracking, but I felt like it was okay to ask. Moving forward, I would actually, because this has happened twice now, that I feel that I've lost a role due to accommodation requests not being met, that I would tell them in the interview, disclose in the interview. And I know a lot of people don't do that, and everyone has their comfortability, but I feel, especially for me now, that I would let them know in the interview that I have a mental health disability and I do need accommodations, will need accommodations, and the kind of accommodations, because I think that knowing from the very beginning would be better off for both parties, I guess you could say, and especially for my mental health, because every sort of knockback is still, it still takes a toll out of me. It's still an emotional cost to me. So even though it's the right choice, that even for me, that I didn't want to continue with the last role because it didn't feel like a company that I could feel included in, I felt comfortable working in, that yes, or it wasn't a right fit, it still took a toll. So I would like that from the beginning. I think I will tell them in the interview going forward that this is something that I need. The whole process of asking for accommodations is in itself emotionally laboring, because we're, especially living with the invisible disability, I feel that asking for accommodations, and it's nerve-wracking, like I said. So it takes space and it takes capacity, and it really is a personal choice. It is depending on how much vulnerability that you feel like you have the space for. And I mean, it's taking me like 10 years to feel comfortable talking about it to this extent, but I wasn't like that from the beginning. So it's not an easy journey, and it takes time, and it's okay if you don't have the space to do it, because it can take a toll on you, as I said, and it can make you feel defeated at the end sometimes as well. But just know that you have rights, and know that what you're asking for isn't over asking, and what you're asking for is perfectly okay. And there's no shame in asking. You know, a disability doesn't mean that you don't have the ability to work. It just means you need some extra resources or tools. And other people could also, who don't have disability, need other kind of resources or tools. We all sometimes need something extra, because life is up and down sometimes. So, sorry, I digress. But you have a right to ask, and just be emotionally prepared. For me, that was one of my biggest things, is knowing that this was going to be emotionally laboring and tasking for me, and having a support system to lean on, and taking care of myself the entire time, making sure that my mental health was managed and everything else I needed to do. So yes, if you feel comfortable, if you feel you have the capacity in this space, advocate for yourself. And the more that we advocate, the more we progress. But always make sure that you are comfortable, and it's all down to your personal choice of how much of yourself and your story and your journey that you want to share.